Hey guys, my name is Tensor. Welcome to another Flutter tutorial video. Today we're going to be taking an older application project that we built on this channel and updating it so that it will work on the latest versions of Flutter. The main issue with this application is that one of the packages, mainly this package here, the geolocation package, has been abandoned by its maintainer, and as a result it's not compatible with Dart 2.0. Along with this package, we're also going to update the other dependencies for this project, and you'll see how some of them have different APIs and how we'll have to change the application so that they work properly. You don't really have to know anything about this project to get into this video. This video is mainly to help people understand how they can take a application that they've built and update the dependencies should the APIs change or should one of the dependencies get abandoned, like the Geolocation Library. Before we go ahead and update this application, I'm just going to show you guys what it should look like. So we have a title here, it says weather application, and then at the top we have this little text which tells us whether or not the location services are active for this application. We also have a drop-down menu which allows us to choose in increments of 5 up to 50 the amount of cities that we want to see around our location. So say we want to see 25 cities, I'll select 25. At the bottom of the application we have a button here which says get the weather, and then we've also got a slider that says turn off data. If we click on the slider, it makes it so that we can't click this button. And then if we turn back on the slider, then we have the ability to actually click the button. If I click the button, you'll see that it will go ahead and get the weather for the area around our current location. And because I chose 25 cities, it should try to get at least 25 different locations. This application is also interesting because we're using initl, which allows us to support various different languages. In this case, we're using Spanish and Japanese. So if I change the language for this device, you can see that now it displays Japanese rather than English for the title and for the button. And of course I can set it back to English, and you can see that it does in fact go back to English. This application uses a library called RxCommand. This is a bit like the block state management technique in that it allows us to essentially take all of our state, put it in one place, and then provide it to our application. So we even have a provider which is very similar to a block provider, which allows us to use the build context to go and get the model command, which is our state class. If you want to learn more about RxCommand or RxWidget, I recommend you go and take a look at the earlier videos in this particular tutorial series. Alright, so right off the bat we know that geolocation doesn't work for Dart 2.0. And I can show you guys the error message that I get when I try to actually go and get this library. You can see here it says that geolocation version 1.1 requires SDK version less than 2.0.0, meaning it doesn't work with the current Dart SDK. There's a very nice website called pub.dartlang.org which allows us to search for any Dart library. And actually we can search for Flutter compatible libraries, we can search for web compatible libraries, and we can search all libraries that are connected to Dart. In this case, I'm just going to search out geolocation, and I want it to be a Flutter compatible library because I'm going to try and find a alternative library to the geolocation library that we currently can't use. So there are quite a few libraries that we can choose here. I'm going to go ahead and choose this geolocator library. On the page for the geolocator library, the maintainer has created a bunch of documentation, which is pretty nice because this will help us understand how this library actually works. And we can go over to the Installing tab and go and copy and paste this line here into our PubSpec YAML. So I've just commented out the Geolocation Library, and then I've just copied in the new Geolocator library. Also, I want to go ahead and update all of these other libraries. To get all of the latest versions, all you really need to do is just copy the name of the library, come over to the pub.dartlang website, paste it in here, search it out, and then click Installing and grab the latest version. And now I've got all of the newer versions. I let the Visual Studio Code extension install the packages for me, and you can see here that it actually worked because we got an exit code 0, and because it said that it installed all of the packages in 8.3 seconds. So everywhere where we have the geolocation package, I want to come in and inspect the code that's associated with it. If we come down to this widget here, which is a stateful widget, we have this little init state function, which instantiates the geolocation object. Now, this function actually isn't needed at all. The only reason why I had it is because the geolocation library had a few errors, and by doing this, it made it so that the library would actually work properly. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and delete this, and then I'm going to turn this widget into a stateless widget. And this is what our resulting stateless widget will look like. If we come down here, we still have some errors in our main.dart file. All of these errors are a result of the RxCommand library, however, and this is mainly because RxCommand's API has changed. The other main area where we have our geolocation library is inside of our weather repository class. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to replace it with the new geolocator library. I've just commented out the geolocation import and then imported geolocator. And now down here inside of the update weather function, we have this location result type, which we want to replace with the geolocator type that's similar to the location result. The corresponding type for this new library is just called position, so we can just replace the location result with a position. And we can take a look and see what the API looks like by taking the result and using a dot to see what kind of methods, getters, and setters are attached to this particular type. We have our latitude and our longitude, which are pretty important, because with the last API, we had to go result.location.latitude and then result.location.longitude. So now we can just remove this location portion and we'll still get the latitude and the longitude. We have a few more functions that we want to modify inside of our weather repository class. The update location function and then the get GPS function. Now the update location function is what allows us to actually get the location and then serve it to our RxCommand module. So what we want to do is replace this location result with a position type. And then we need to figure out how we can actually get this position. An easy way to kind of figure out what the API for this would look like is to instantiate the geolocator object. So here we have our geolocator object. And then when I put a dot on it, again, we get all of the methods and the fields that we can attach to this particular object. Right here we have a method called getCurrentPosition, and this seems to be the method that we want in this case. If I hover over getCurrentPosition, you can see here that it returns a future position. So this is actually exactly what we want. The getCurrentPosition method also allows us to define the desired accuracy that we want for our GPS locator. And in this case, I'm just going to specify that it should be the best accuracy possible. So I'm using a type called location accuracy, and then I'm just adding the best field to it. Below our update function, we have a function called getGPS. And this function allows us to essentially check to see if the user has location services active when the application is open. And before, what it would do is it would call this isLocation operational method on the geolocation object, and then we get back a geolocation result, and we could check to see if that result is successful, which would allow us to return true. And then if it isn't successful, then we could return false, meaning we don't have access to the GPS for the device. What we want to do is again instantiate the geolocator object, and then we want to add a dot so that we can see if there are any methods that will allow us to check to see if GPS is active on the device. The method that we're going to use is called checked geolocation permission status. If we hover over this, you can see here it returns a geolocation status type inside of a future. The documentation tells us that it returns a future containing the current geolocation status type, indicating the availability of location services on the device. So here where we have the geolocation result type, we want to replace this with the geolocation status type from the Geolocator library. And now we can just say if our result is equivalent to a geolocation status granted, then we'll return true, which means we have access to the GPS. Otherwise, we'll return false, which means that we don't have access to the GPS. And with that, you can see that inside of Weather Repository, all of the errors are now cleared up because we've now interfaced with the proper API that we wanted. So now let's go into our model command class. This is the class where we have all of our RxCommand logic. And you can see here we're still using geolocation, and we're getting a bunch of errors because it's trying to grab this location result type. So what we can do is highlight all of the location results and then replace them with position types. And this will clean up all of the errors that are related to the old geolocation library and allow us to use the geolocator library. But of course we still have errors in here because we updated our RxCommand library, and this old API where we defined the RxCommand type using the numbered functions is depreciated. If we take a look at the RxCommand object, you can see that we've got a new set of functions here. We've got create async with no param, create async with no param and no result, and create async with no result. All of these are associated with some of the numbers that we had before. The first line here, this get GPS command, the way that this function works is it doesn't take in any kind of arguments, but it outputs the GPS for us. So what we want to do is create an asynchronous command that outputs only a result but doesn't take in an argument. We want to replace the original create async 2 with create async no param. Down below where we have the radio checked command, we have an anonymous function where we pass in a boolean and then we pass back a boolean. So we can just create a normal synchronous command that takes in a boolean and outputs a boolean around this function. The next command, which is our locale command, uses create sync1, and if we take a look at this function here called setLanguage, you can see it takes in a string, but it doesn't output any kind of return statement. So we want to use a synchronous command that takes in a param but doesn't have a result. So in this case, we'll replace it with create sync no result. Now let's take a look at the update weather command. This is using create async 3, which means that the update weather function both has a parameter and a result. In this case, we have a position that goes into the function and then a list of weather model that comes out of the function. So we can just use the basic create async RxCommand to create this particular command. The add cities command is a synchronous RxCommand, and if we hover over the function here, you can see it takes in an integer, but it outputs a void, meaning it outputs nothing. So we just want to create a synchronous function that passes back no result. Finally, we have our last command. This command used to take in a stream and then create an RxCommand based on that stream. So before we used RxCommand create from stream, and then we passed in a function called update location stream. This function no longer exists, and the create from stream is not quite the same because now we're using a future rather than a stream. So what we want to do is kind of mold it to our new function. And the new function that we're going to use here is this update location function, which we changed earlier in the video. You can see here that the update location function takes in no parameter, but it does output a result. So instead of creating an RxCommand from a stream using a dynamic input and then a position as the output, we can just create an asynchronous function with no parameter using just a position. So we use create async no param, and then of course we want to pass in our new function, which is repo update location. We can also go through here and rename the command, so we can just call it update location command instead of update location stream command. And we'll do the same for this one here and for this one down here. And we also want to come up to the top here and modify the name of the update location command here and change the type annotation from dynamic position to null position because it doesn't take in anything but it outputs a position. And we'll also update the name of this particular variable inside of our model command constructor. Now finally we have one more error inside of this file, and this has to do with the little piece that is actually listening to the changes in the weather command. Before, what we were doing is taking the update location command and then taking the results of this command, listening on them, taking the data from the results and then passing them into our update weather command. And now because this command takes in no data, we can just remove that data from it and it should work. Before our application is finished, we need to fix the errors that are inside of our main.dart file. Let's figure out what these errors are actually saying so that we can fix them. It says here that the argument type of RxCommand null, bool cannot be assigned to the parameter type of stream command result bool. So to actually fix this, what we need to do is just add this results field to the end of the call to our get GPS command. And we also want to do the same to the update weather command call down here. And then finally we have this call here, and we need to just replace the old update weather stream command name with our new update weather command name. And that should clean up the rest of the errors inside of our application. So the reason why we add this results field to the end of our RxCommand is so that we actually get the observable that we're emitting from the RxCommand itself. You can think of each of our RxCommands like stream controllers. That is to say that each stream controller has a stream, which is the results side, meaning the data is moving out from the RxCommand to the UI in this case. And then the RxCommand also has a sync, which is called from this little call method here. And if there are any kind of arguments that we wanted to pass into the stream, we could pass them through this little call method. If I hover over the update weather command here, you can just see it says RxCommand of position and list weather model. Whereas if I hover over the results field, you can see that it says it's an RxCommand results function that emits an observable of command result type with a list of weather model inside of it. Hovering over the call type, you can see here it's just a method on the RxCommand, and it shows that you can pass in some dynamic parameters as well. Now we can go ahead and run our application. You can see here that we have various cities which are based on our current location. We have the ability to check to see if our GPS is active, which on this device it is currently active. And then we can of course turn off data, which makes it so that we can't click the button here. We can turn the data back on, And we can also choose how many cities we want to get based on our location. So let's choose 50. And then when I click Get Weather, it will go ahead and get 50 different locations and give us 50 different areas of weather. We can go ahead and modify the latitude and the longitude of our location so that we can see different cities. So here I've put us somewhere in, I think, Brazil. So now if I click Get Weather, it will now give us a bunch of Brazilian cities instead. Alright guys, well I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, feel free to like and subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the box below. And if you dislike this video, then by all means downvote it as much as you like. Have a good night.